am Rebecca Ali. I am an HR person, have been a stay-at-home parent for a while, but I'm in my last 2 weeks of an HR management master's degree at Georgetown University, graduating on May 19th, so excited. And the reason we're talking about burnout today is because my capstone project was about burnout. And so I spent the last 4 months immersing myself in burnout. When you start to talk about burnout, and the research does bear out that coaching actually helps you clarify what you want. So a lot of the research is done on the sort of the medical profession because they have such high rates of burnout. But what they did was they studied physicians who had one-on-one coaching sessions. And in just a very short time, they sort of reported that their exhaustion decreased and their feelings of burnout decreased. And I think because we are in this society and in this work culture where it's like, climb the ladder, go as fast as you can, get to the top. Well, what's the top, right? And sometimes there's not that clarity of what you should be doing, really what you should be doing. And we often put a lot on our plate and don't know how to get it off our plate. So I think a coach definitely helps. So if you have the opportunity to talk to someone sooner rather than later, I think that would be a good, helpful thing from an organizational perspective. And I think one of the key sort of takeaways is that to say, I think as an organization, here are the key things you're going to want to look for, and how do we help employees manage through challenges? And I think specifically after the pandemic, the awareness has been more heightened. Burnout has actually been studied since the 1970s by this wonderful social psychologist at Berkeley named Christina Maslach. She's done some fantastic talks recently in the tech industry, but also a lot of research has been done in the medical field. So physicians tend to have a high rate of burnout, understandably so. So WHO, the World Health Organization, came out with an official definition in 2019 that basically says that burnout is a syndrome that's created when a workplace stress has not been successfully managed. So they're specifically talking about it in the workplace setting, but this could be extrapolated to your personal life as well. So there are basically 3 dimensions of burnout. It's exhaustion, both mental and physical sometimes. It's cynicism about your work or distancing yourself from your work. And it's having low self-efficacy. So you don't think that you're doing a good job in what you're doing. So if you have all 3 of those things, you are likely in burnout. I thought that was really interesting because I'm like, some people are like, oh man, I'm so tired. So because burnout is so commonplace in our language, it's important to understand that true burnout is really the composite of those 3 things. If you don't have those 3 things, you might be something else. One of the most interesting things I found out was that the effect that burnout has on your brain, and this is why it's so important to catch it early, deal with it, and treat it. But what happens is, when you talk about stress, you have this cortisol that's released into your brain, right? Your body's like, we need to fight or flight, what's happening? What's going on? You have this persistent stress. What happens is it enlarges your amygdala, which is your fight or flight gland, and that disrupts the connections to the parts of your brain that deal with emotion regulation and executive functioning. So if you think about your brain is bathed in these chemicals and you don't have the capacity to then talk yourself out of the feelings that you're having, this sort of fight or flight. And so over a long period of time, you create just this feedback loop of negative thoughts and emotions. And so someone who's truly burnt out actually needs deeper intervention, some really directed therapy or extreme rest, a low stress environment. If you think about someone who's in a long-term stress response, that can lead to a shrinking of the prefrontal cortex and could lead to other sort of brain health conditions like depression or even like a precursor to Alzheimer's. And I think people sometimes wear burnout as a badge of honor So, oh, I worked so hard, I burnt out. It's not. It's not. I can't stress it enough. Like, it really does impact your long-term health and your ability to make decisions and learn new things.
The actions that you can do to de-stress, bring on brain health. I literally pictured like we bathe regularly for hygiene.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, this is like hygiene for your brain.
Yes.
This is like mental health hygiene. As, okay, you brush your teeth, so regular regimen of what are you going to do to clean your brain? Because think about what this precious thing does for us all day, every day. We're not even aware of everything that it does, but it just keeps on doing it. Let's show this brilliant piece of work some love, some compassion, and that fight or flight just kind of, it's like going, okay, everything's all right. We're safe.
So Christina Masloch and her team at Berkeley have been studying this burnout for a long time, and there are really 6 core causes that they've found of burnout, and those are workload, control, rewards, fairness, values, and community. And when I say that, I mean unmanageable workload, lack of control, rewards that don't match the work that's being done, fairness, the rules aren't being applied fairly, values, I don't know what my purpose is here, I don't like what we're doing, and you have these red flags, right? I sort of think of burnout and the symptoms of burnout as being these fire alarms going off in your brain and your body, and it's saying, you got to do something different, right? You wouldn't ignore a fire alarm going off in your house. Why are you ignoring what's happening in your brain? The last one was a lack of community support. And I think that's so important. And when you think about work, teams are really important. But I think where we've sort of missed the opportunity is that this sort of lack of control, right? So we're a very task-oriented society and workplace. What about if we focus on outcomes and we let people get to that outcome however they want to do it? If you think about that at home, I need to feed my family, but that doesn't mean I have to spend 10 hours in the kitchen. That could be, we're doing a takeout night, right? we're all pitching in and helping, or we're going to grill, or we're going to have leftovers. You know, there are different paths to the outcome, and my path is going to look maybe different than your path, and really appreciating that. There is something called the social exchange theory, and it is, am I getting back what I'm putting in? When you think about work and rewards and fairness and community and workload and control, it all sort of comes back to that social exchange theory.
It's fascinating because I never knew that was a thing, but yet I've had relationships where I felt the reciprocity that is necessary for a healthy dynamic has not been there.
So when I talked earlier about the 3 dimensions of burnout, and really you kind of need all 3 of those things to be truly burnt out, but some people will say, oh, I'm so burnt out. There's actually kind of a spectrum of burnout, and Christina Masloch has created a burnout inventory. It's called Masloch's Burnout Inventory, and as an organization or an individual, you can take this survey, and it's just on a 7-point scale of never to daily, and it asks you a bunch of questions. And then as an organization or an individual, you can complete something called an areas of work life survey. So as an organization, if I were worried about my employee engagement, one of the first things I would do is invest in doing this burnout inventory and areas of work life survey, because what it's going to do is tell you where your employees sit in this sort of spectrum of burnout, which I'll tell you about in a minute, and what's causing it. Right? What of those 6 areas that I talked about earlier? Is it workload? Is it control? Is it values, reward, fairness, or community? Where can I, as an HR person or as a leader, where can I dig around and take a look and see what are we missing? So if you pair these things and you do them, you sort of find out where you are on this spectrum. So the spectrum is you are either an engaged person, which means that you don't have any issues with exhaustion, that first dimension, ineffectiveness, which is that low self-efficacy, that disengaged, which is the cynicism, or if you are truly burnt out. So there's this, I'm exhausted, I'm tired. That solution looks different than someone who might have low self-efficacy only, so who might feel ineffective. Maybe they need coaching or additional training or something else, right? So having that knowledge is really important from both an individual and an organizational perspective. So once you find out kind of where your employees or your business units or whatever sit, and then you look at the areas of work-life data, and you go, oh, we have a problem with community. Well, what can we do to enhance the community and social support in our organization? And that might look like more team building. That might look like more manager training on how to build effective teams. That might look like ERGs or volunteer opportunities or whatever your company kind of needs. And so I think when you look at sort of the examples, there was one company that found either fairness or rewards was a little bit off. And what they did was they went back to their employees and they said, this really scored kind of high in terms of a negative for fairness. What's going on? What does this mean? And they were like, well, we have this Employee of the Month award or whatever it is, and it seems like it's more political than fair. And they changed the award, and their scores next time they did it went up, right? So it could be something very simple, or it could be something much more complicated. But I think once you have the data and the insights, you can kind of play around with it and see what is it about our systems and our structure that's creating the environment that's burning our people out. I think the research would point to, if you have burnout within your organization, it's probably not going to be just a few people. Usually burnout stems from an organizational problem, whether that's culture, leadership, the work, whatever it is. Like, you just need to determine that. If you only have a few people with burnout scattered amongst your employees, that's going to be a completely different conversation than if you think, oh, I have a much bigger problem. And one of the great examples is that the Mayo Clinic realized a long time ago that they had a burnout problem. And in seeking a way to sort of give people control of the work and reduce the workload, hopefully, but also just sort of build this community, which tends to have a reinforcing effect of building resilience, is that they created a program called Listen, Act, Develop. Basically, they find out, like, what's going on? What's causing this burnout? Where is the stress coming from? And then they give the workers, and they create sort of teams, cross-functional teams, and they say, go find a solution. And it seems counterintuitive to give people more work to solve a problem, but actually it's giving them back control. And so when they have control, people feel like they can affect change. They're going to affect change that actually helps them, right? And in the course of that, they build skills, they develop themselves, they become leaders, and they build connections within the organization, which again sort of increases that resilience and that ability to bounce back from hard days. And so I think that's a great example of, what can a manager do? Well, you know what? It does seem counterintuitive to give people more work, but if you do it in the context of, let's make it better together, then that definitely sort of moves you in the right direction. I would say if you have just a few people who maybe are struggling, that's probably a one-off conversation where you offer them whatever assistance they need. One of the great examples that we sort of ran across was, I think it was Dell, where one of the leaders was like, we're going through the pandemic, it's really hard, we wanted to communicate, we didn't want to ask too many personal questions, so we just implemented this thing where we say, let us know at the beginning of whatever meeting we're having if you're feeling above the line or below the line today. And, if someone came on and said, I'm really below the line, there was no shame, no stigma. They just closed the circle and said, no problem, we're going to fill in these gaps. And then hopefully the next day they come back and they're saying, okay, I'm above the line. Because, we all have bad days, right? We all have something going on. We're just like, nope, overwhelmed, can't do it. I'm below the line today, need a little extra help. Maybe you didn't sleep well, whatever, personal problems, whatever. So I really loved that example of just like this verbal cue that was no questions asked. We're a team. We know not everyone's going to be 100% every single day. And simply that verbal, I'm below, I'm above, was enough to make everybody go, yep, we got you. Right? And I think that, again, building that resilience is really important.
I love the ability to be transparent. Again, I have control to speak my truth.
Yes.
Right? And I know that I'm not going to be judged when I do that. What an incredible culture. That doesn't happen overnight, right? That takes work.
Yes.
That there's serious intention from the beginning to the end, meaning our talent acquisition teams are making sure that we're hiring people that are really going to be a healthy culture fit to that trusting environment.
It is possible, but it has to be a top-down leadership decision, right? It's sort of like anything, right? It's like anything. You can't have true diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging unless that's what is coming from the top and it's getting pushed down and it's really being measured and rewarded the way it should be, and really accepted. And I think that's for mental health support as well. Interestingly enough, I found this really, really fascinating that the CIA has recently hired a chief wellness officer. And I was like, I must read more about how the CIA is incorporating this into their work, right? Why was this important and why did they do this? Well, obviously the CIA is challenging. I don't know. I would assume that it's a very challenging place to work because of what they see and what they do. And since 9/11, they've sort of had this huge job, right? And secretive job. And they really only have each other. So in December, they hired a chief wellness officer as part of a rebranding because they need to bring in younger workers, right? As a Gen Xer, I'm like, yes, go Gen Z, go millennials. Take care of yourselves, right? Don't do what we did. And so the Gen Z people are like, look, I'm not into killing myself for work. What do you how are you going to help me be more well-balanced in my life? And I think this sort of rebranding and sort of putting wellness top of mind is wonderful. I think that, in sort of these fundamental ways, work has to change, and we have to see people as not robots that, don't have lives, and more like people who are whole people with needs and families and histories that have to be appreciated for what they bring. I think you could probably Google, how do I combat burnout, and find 1,000 articles or more, probably 10,000 articles to tell you what to do. And, it will come down to sleep, that brain hygiene, right? Sleep actually serves a purpose, cleans out all those bad chemicals. Meditation and exercise, which are so good. Nutrition, hydration, finding purpose outside of your work, and being in nature, connecting to what's around you. And I think understanding your place in the grand scheme of things is really important as well. And, that's in every piece of literature. But I think you journal. That's great for you. I'm not a journaler. I can't journal. But I will go sit outside and listen to the birds sing. And I will watch a bee for 5 minutes, pollinate, collect pollen from a flower, because I find that really fascinating and it really relaxes me. But, everybody has to find their own thing. But I think understanding what your thing is and being consistent with it is really important. And circling back to sort of compassion and starting with compassion, a lot of this is self-compassion, right? It's understanding who you are and what you want and being okay with saying, I am not hitting on all cylinders right now. Why is that? And really digging into that. And then when you think about, especially if you're in a position of leadership, or as myself, I'm an HR person, right? Is understanding that when you're seeing the symptoms, you got to drill down and find the root cause. It's not enough to say, let's throw money at the problem. And I think one of the just heartbreaking things that I talked to 4 different anonymous people, all women, who shared their stories of burnout. And these are not stories from 20 years ago. These are stories from today. Like right now, this is happening where, these brilliant women were working so hard, giving everything, all of their time. I had one wonderful person who said she was working 100 hours a week, would basically get up, roll out, start working, take enough time to take a shower, and then go back to work. And then, she literally burnt herself out, like physically and mentally exhausted. Her boss ended up leaving, and she was like, I just knew that I had given that person so much that I was burnt out. And I went to my company and I said, I really don't think I can do this anymore. And she was told, here's some more money. You just need to suck it up. Right? And she's like, I just couldn't do it. She's like, I couldn't. And that was an executive at her company saying, basically, get over it. And she's like, I left. She's like, I just quit. And she's like, it's taken months of recovery, reading, exercising, and just sleeping, and until she could get back to a good place. And I wish that was a unique story, but that's not a unique story. And it's public sector, private sector, it's across the board. And I think as leaders, we really need to understand that there is more. You're going to get farther doing the right thing by your people than just driving towards a goal. And I think that's underappreciated sometimes, that human-centered leadership and that compassionate leadership is really needed in sort of this global complex world that we live in. Sometimes I think as an HR person, we've trained leaders to just focus on the work and not, because we're too scared of lawsuits, or we're too don't ask that question. And truly, there are questions you shouldn't ask. That is true. But I think you can have a conversation with an employee that is human, and just getting to know them a little bit better, like what's going on in your life, and celebrating the small wins, and not necessarily focused on just come in, do the work, go home, we don't care. I just don't think that's going to fly anymore. I think we're in a new place now, and that's not a bad thing. So there are physiological symptoms of burnout and sort of effects of burnout, high blood pressure, other cardiovascular issues, this sort of distancing from the people you love, right? Just different physical manifestations, right? One of the key things we found in the research was that there is not a lot of research about men in burnout, because it's not something that's really talked about or admitted to. But when they do see sort of those sort of how people cope with stress, incredible stress or burnout, it's usually in the form of vices, things like alcohol, drugs, food, whatever it is. So I think it's really important that women tend to be more emotional and emotionally exhausted, where men tend to become more cynical and have that sort of low self-efficacy portion. So it's really important to recognize that in our male colleagues and our partners and that as well, and really understand that they're experiencing it differently than maybe women are.
Those are some really powerful powerful visuals for us to watch out for. So thank you for that. And I really appreciate the call out of the community aspect, going back to the community, that showing up for each other, not just showing up for ourselves, but showing up for each other and saying, I'm seeing some symptoms, possible symptoms that my friend, my partner, my colleague, what can I do to help? Maybe I can take a little bit of the responsibility, provided I'm in a good and healthy place, what can we do to help out? You mentioned the scenario earlier, above or below the line, and the team jumps in to help when somebody's below the line. That's the visual that I'm getting in my mind right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes it's a one-off thing. Sometimes it's a small period of time. But if it goes over a long period of time, then you're getting into other mental health and physical health concerns. And I think it's really important just to be aware of it.
I really do believe as individuals, we can look at our company leadership to do the right thing. But at the end of the day, we are all accountable for what and how our life looks like. And we all have to sometimes make the difficult decisions to say, you know what, I deserve better. I don't know what better looks like, but I need to go find it. I know it's not this. I need to go find out what better looks like. And that's frightening.
Yes.
That's the devil, okay, I know this, but do you know how detrimental it is to your health? If that's your reality, the scenario that you just spoke about, do you know how detrimental this is really to what's going on here? Because if you did, then you may want to start looking for other options of, there's a better place. Let's go find another company that isn't just throwing money at things or isn't taking employees for granted, because we all deserve better than what that woman that you spoke about was experiencing. We all deserve better than that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Yeah, it's interesting because comes from a place of privilege as well. Right? So not everyone has the option. But I think as leaders, we need to see that all levels. It's when you're sitting in the top office. It's that's why I admire, CEOs that go and work in a store or serve the coffee or whatever. Like, it could be performative in some cases, but in other cases, I really hope that they're understanding not just what the customers want, but what their employees are going through as they're sort of doing the actual work of the company. You like Brene Brown, right?
I love Brene Brown.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I saw something this morning when we were talking about this sort of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and the community part of it, right? And I just saw a little clip of her saying, the really interesting thing about the research on belonging is the opposite of belonging is fitting in. And I was like, oh wow, she's so insightful. I just love her research brings her to these sort of wonderful things. She's like, because the very act of fitting in is you abandoning yourself.
Right.
True belonging is just being able to go in and be yourself.
Wow. And it's so simple. Anybody that's ever been either in a clique or even outside of a clique, thinking back to high school, right? Yep. You were either fitting in, possibly, to be in the clique, right? Or else you were on the outside thinking, I'm glad I'm not in it. Or maybe you were thinking, I wish I was in it. But yes.
I heard that this morning. I'm like, yes. And so when you're in a company or when you're in a group or whatever, if you're looking at someone and saying, well, that's not how I would do it, or you should be doing it this way, it's really about making that person fit. One of the things Christina Maslach says in one of her videos is, burnout is like the canary in the coal mine. And really what we've been doing is fitting people to the job. And what we should have been doing all along was fitting the job to the people. And I was like, was like, because everybody's going to bring something different. What is the outcome you want? Let them get there, right? You might have to guide them. You might say, hey, we've done it like this before, but that doesn't mean we have to do it that way again. This is not set in stone, for heaven's sake, in most cases.
Drop the mic, walk away.
Save the best for last, I know. Yeah, Burnout is fascinating research. I find it really fascinating. We sort of looked at the future, right? So the future of sort of burnout identification, remediation, and prevention, and using machine learning and AI and things like ChatGPT, for better or for worse, to really look at microdata and identify people who might be at risk of burnout, and creating tools that make it easier to do your job. And so that's things like just-in-time training, right? So if I'm struggling with a spreadsheet and I'm like, oh man, I don't have time to take a 20-minute Excel course, like being able to say, I need to do this, and having that information pop up right away, that's a good use of AI, right? And just really getting rid of the mind-numbing work that doesn't add a lot of value but increases stress. So that depleting work, getting rid of that and letting people do what they're really good at in that creative, innovative space. Like there's fascinating research on neurotech and how wearables can actually improve the work environment and improve safety. And that's in the Harvard Business Review current edition. I think it's called Neurotech at Work, if anyone's interested in reading it. But it's really interesting how with AI and robotics and an EEG, the EEG measures stress response in your brain, and the AI says, we need to slow this down. It tells the robot, slow down the manufacturing, like the assembly line, and to an optimal pace. And then you don't have safety issues, you don't have quality issues, you have this beautiful, cohesive machine, man and machine, working together in the most optimal way. And that, I think, is just fascinating for the future.
So, Rebecca, I want to thank you so much for coming on to the Start With Compassion platform and everything that you've done to support Start With Compassion. So much of our early research you brought to the table. So I would like to thank you for all of that. My original partner in building out all this stuff I had in my head and my heart. So thank you for that as well. I hope to have you on again in the future. This is such important work. So I'm really happy that we can share your knowledge, all this incredible work that you did on your master's thesis. I'm glad you could share it on this platform. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Hopefully we informed someone and they're going to go seek help and help themselves and show themselves some compassion.
Rebecca, what if people want to learn more about burnout? I know you've provided some really great tools, some really great resources, but what if they want to learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. You can definitely reach out to me. I'll provide my email address. I have a website. You can contact me on that as well. I think, my sort of specialty is small and medium-sized business support. So if you're looking for just help, sometimes it can be really overwhelming to run your own business and try to figure out what to do next. I'm happy to answer some questions.
Perfect. Excellent. And I can tell everybody that Rebecca is an absolutely fantastic partner. Just a side note, Rebecca and I worked together, 2008, 2009?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Yeah, for a few years, and then came back together in 2021, started chatting again. Yeah, so we have a long history. So, all right, perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.